Hello, everybody. We are live here on Tuesday night, and I have a heck of a show for you. We are going to start by showing I have fasted since Sunday. I've got a pretty stable blood sugar there that you can see at 62, and my ketones are at 2.7. We are going to start by playing a game. If you clicked on that thumbnail, you have a heck of a treat in for you that we are looking at some brain games. The brain games that sometimes I use to assess how my patients are doing. And we're going to start by looking at your brain. All right, I want you to look at this slide. And as I push play on this slide, if you're watching this on replay, you can just turn down the volume and do this while you watch. If you're live, you might want to push mute because I've practiced this a couple times and it's not great. So you want to say the color of the word, not what the word says. So here we go. Get ready, get set. Blue, red, green, black, yellow, red, yellow, black, blue, black, black, it's yellow. Okay, brain sorting game that is difficult. Hang in there, we got a couple more tests. There are puzzles in the video. We want you to help solve the puzzles. So the way this one works is by looking at these set of instructions, you should be able to figure out a pattern. We're gonna go to the next slide. And again, if you're doing this on replay, you might want to just take a screenshot, do the puzzle, and then watch how I do it. The first one is about to begin. Ready, set. All right, and oh, I just screwed up. Oh, somewhere I got two letters in a row. Okay, so you saw how that one went. Now watch this one. Ready, set, go. And I'm going to speak out loud because that's how I do this. One. Oh yeah. B. Two. C. Three. Where's D? What I want you doing is trying to do this as well and timing yourself to see how long it takes you to finish it. Well, D is hiding from me. You know, the longer it takes me to find D, the more demented I feel. Oh, there's D. D. Four. Oh, no, D then five. Where's five? Five. E. Six. It's right in front of me. Oh, there it is. Six. All right. You can keep going. We're going to do another one. So this one is another working memory test where you can write it down, but you're not supposed to say it out loud. So I'm going to use a white one, and you start at 100 and count backwards from 100 by sevens. So 100, and then oh, no, you count backward by sevens. Did I say sevens? I meant sevens. Uh, uh, Did I do that right? No, it'd be 29. There you go. And well, I don't think it's supposed to turn out that way. Next, we go to these are cross-talking instructions. So start by putting your right hand up with this symbol, and then it's called that, I call that the rabbit, and this one is gun, and then you're gonna switch them. Rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun. Okay, so hang in there. Now we're gonna practice one more. I think there's two more actually. And then you're gonna say okay, and you're gonna say peace, and then you're gonna do okay, peace, okay, peace, and then you do okay, peace, okay, peace. Oh yeah, okay, peace. All right, hang in there. Next, you're gonna do the final one, which is like peace, and then hang loose, or bullhorn, and then peace and this one, and peace and this one, oopsie, and that one and this one. And what these are opposite sides of the brain that you're having to tap into. And now you're going to do it at the same time. So so gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun, rabbit, gun. And now you're going to do it with peace and, oh, that's way too fast. Peace and okay. Peace and okay. Peace and okay. And then the last one is hang loose and peace. And that's way too fast for me. My brain's getting slower the longer we do this. All right, so this brings me to what we're talking about tonight, which is in the month of December, I try to do a reset every year. This actually started when I was on a speaking circuit where I would get to travel to different military bases and teach the National Guard about how to repair an injured brain. And the speaking time that I did was always in the late fall, or at least that's when the highest concentration of travel happened. So I would do one after another. And it just really prepared me that get a good understanding of how well your brain is working. And December was this really good time for me to take inventory and see how well is my brain doing. In tradition now for 4 years since living in Florida, any of the students who had bought the Brains course have private time with the classroom from this year. And we've had the first class yesterday. We have another class tomorrow where we talk about brains, and it really reminds me, oh yeah, here's what my brain is doing. Here's how well brains are looking. Mine is looking. And when I do this now, I look to see how well that literature that I really curated about 12 years ago, and then it started in a little bit of a circuit, and then I got into a better speaking, and then I got hired by the Department of Defense, and we did all this. Then I put on an online course. And you say, well, I wonder how well that information looks. So as I was looking at that information and really reflecting on my brain, and then several stories from the pin chasers, from patients, helped me to see what happens when brains don't work well. And there's a great study that says, what predicts dementia? And those little tests that we just did, those are very common tests that I use within my practice. I've used the trail test as one of those that's very specific. And you say, well, how good am I doing with my brain mapping? And that those tests are looking at working memory. So as I was reviewing the literature and said, well, let's see how up to date we are, I came across this article. And this article says, how well can we predict dementia? It is recent from March of 2024, looking at do the tools that I've got in my toolbox and the ones I teach in that course, how relevant are they? So let's take a look at that, what the study had to say, because I think you're going to find a very interesting correlation, not just to this study, but to what you should be looking at and what I think, keep going. No, not that one. No, don't do that either. There you go. That's what I wanted. When I look at this study, there's a few things. We're going to come back and look at this chart in just a second, where they said, what markers should we be looking at when it comes to health problems and those, what do you have going on in your body and brain that people should pay attention to? So I just want you to look at the different things that were in this study. I think the health indicators that they started with were they depressed? How many months did they have depression in their life? Were they incontinent? What's their weight? What's the number of drugs they have, meaning prescription medications? What is their cognition? A lot of the tests that we just did there, they do them, you get a score in that. Then they looked at other places, like what was the size of their gray matter in their brain, their white matter in their brain, and then several other biomarkers. So here is this kind of map of what mattered when it comes to the human brain and predicting dementia. And you can come back and look at this after I give you the answer here in just a second. But I think it's powerful to say, well, when we had them draw a clock, how did that turn out? When we had them do this mini mental status exam, things that if you've gone to your doctor saying, hey, is my memory going? Am I okay? And I do things like what we just worked on, timing the patient, and not as easy when I'm the one on the other side in front of an audience trying to do it. And I want you to look at this measurement right here. And we're going to talk about that in our study here. When I look at the different things that not only we have in our health, but when I look at this, here's the answer for what should you be looking at? Should you be looking at those results of those tests? And now with, just a massive explosion in how we can look at brains and say, we know that if you show up in my office, especially if you show up accompanied, meaning your child brought you in, your spouse brought you in, your neighbor brought you in, that you are 15 years deep into pathology, that if you aren't the one bringing yourself in, if you didn't notice it, or if you ignored it and now someone else is bringing you to the physician, it's a point of no return. That memory problem is so profound that we're going to have a heck of a time pushing undo. So if you aren't there and you say, well, what can I be looking at to say, do I have a problem? Now let's go over to our slides. Oopsie, wrong one. This one. Number one was the hippocampal volume. That was what I was circling on that chart, was if you look at the size of their hippocampus, this little worm-like structure, you have two of them that go around the sides of your primitive brain, kind of deep in that midbrain of your brain. And when they are little and wimpy and tiny little snake-like, meaning it's not got a thick hippocampus, your risk of dementia is incredibly predictable. But like, since I've looked at the literature, which it may be 2 years since I really looked at hippocampal volumes, that they had a good study where I could say, did it make a difference? Go back and read that study. Go back and look at those outcomes, that there is nothing that comes close to what studying the mass of your hippocampus is. And we're going to talk about, well, are you at risk? Should you be worried about your hippocampus? And if so, what do we do to undo that? How do I make a bigger, thicker, longer hippocampi if you're telling me the volume of that hippocampus is what predicts dementia? Now, let's look at the other things that did make the list, because they weren't shabby. They just were not anywhere close to the amount of information that the hippocampus was. There was brain volume in general, just the global brain volume, and a couple of specific regions of the brain that were important. But again, the hippocampus won. There were some places that called white matter hyperintensities. Again, they were looking at lots of different biomarkers, lots of tests and predictors and functions, and that's why I wanted to show you the paper. That incontinence, could you have mobility? Were you flexible? All of these were looked at, and hippocampal volume 1. Like the amount of mass in your brain that makes up your hippocampus still is such a huge predictor for whether or not you're going to get dementia. They did look at, cognitive functions weren't nothing. This APO E4 allele, that is a genetic test. That was number 5 on the list. And then finally, age and education. And I just want you to notice trips around the sun are not such a bad thing. It comes with wisdom. Age used to be the best predictor. I mean, when we were really looking at some of the other ways to measure how is, age being such a correlator for the onset of Alzheimer's and memory problems, but now way better predictors, especially the better we get at measuring the brain, looking at the brain, and then some of those genetic tests. All right, so let's take a look at this. We're going to learn about this tonight. You're going to see some of the stories that I think are worthy of telling. And if you have kiddos or anybody in your life who may be at risk for Alzheimer's, and I'll tell you, my birthday was this past week, turning 53. I don't want to have any of these problems yet. And I think once you see up close and personal what it looks like into a brain that's not working well, this stuff will matter more. All right, let's go to, I'm going to hop over here to not have that problem anymore. So the first thing about what mattered when it came to the hippocampal size in our brains. So we do these MRIs, we look at the volume of the hippocampus, and you say, well, how do you get a big, long, thick hippocampus? I'll tell you, the place that I taught this the most, yes, I did the National Guard, but once a couple of middle school teachers had been to the lecture, they kind of farmed me out to a bunch of middle schoolers saying, oh, you see, this hippocampus is something that you grow when you're in the womb, those first couple of years of life, it grows super fast, then it slows down, and then from the moment puberty starts until about 25 years old, that hippocampus is growing. And I used to use Michael Jordan, and I have this big, picture, a slide up on the show, Michael Jordan, and his tongue was hanging out, and I would talk about how impressive his brain was, how much he was still advancing his skill set late as an athlete. And although we have other examples of that now, it really resonated with using this iconic athlete. And I would talk about how long and thick his hippocampus was. And these middle schoolers would get the joke, even if my audience right now doesn't get the joke. But you had their attention that this brain was a developmental process because, well, he had a stable childhood. He also didn't have head injuries. If you were going to look at the way he created that long, thick hippocampus, it had to do with, well, how he formed his hippocampus. During that stable sleep schedule, he didn't do drugs, he didn't have a lot of head injuries, and in fact, the size of his hippocampus is just wildly impressive and reflective in his career and outcomes, his success in life. All right, so if you're going to have a hippocampus that's got problems, you might have had some physical head trauma. And this is pretty easy to see on a SPECT scan that this brain is normal. There's no holes in it. Just looking at a SPECT scan, this is where your eyeballs are. This is where the patient's nose is. This is the back of the head. And as you might expect, this patient was hit with a baseball. That baseball swelled the brain. It also gave him a goose egg on the outside of his brain, but inside the brain, there was so much energy transferred from that ball through the skull and into the brain that there's a section of his brain that isn't turned on anymore. It's stunned. And if we do everything right, we'll turn that back on. But we know that when the brain swells, one of the most sensitive areas of the brain that stops growing is the hippocampus. So think back in your life and say, how many head injuries did you have? And especially if you ever lost consciousness. So the second thing we added to the list was if you had chemical trauma. So the first one was physical trauma. That stops the growth of your hippocampus. But the second one is chemical trauma. And I look at this 37-year-old male. And unlike the last one where there was just one area of injury, this has multiple sides that have the injury, it has front and back. There's holes everywhere in this brain. And what was the problem with this patient? What happened? Well, he was a heavy alcohol drinker. That is a very young age for a brain to be that riddled with defects. But you also look at this study, probably my favorite one when I was teaching that middle school, excuse me, that middle school audience, is that when you took these two 15-year-old boys, and they were in a, again, boy brains, girl brains, boy brains in their development, much easier to predict their development based on years of age. Whereas a girl brain was a little harder to predict when that maturation happened. We would measure it for time from menarche, from the first period on. So these two boys, 15 years old, you've got this one that's not a drinker and this one that drinks alcohol. So when you look at this scan, it's specifically looking at that metabolic activity. How well is it using certain parts of the brain? And this test was done while the two boys were in a scan looking at that memory task. So much like we just did a couple of those tests, their tests were different, but you're watching how much brain are they recruiting to look at the performance of the test. So as you might expect, this boy brain did not perform very well in the test, and it is actually a result of how much brain he was recruiting to do the task. You say, well, maybe he just wasn't focusing. This was repeated and reproducible. What's also interesting is that he was a heavy drinker on the weekends, and this test was done on a Wednesday, meaning he had not had anything to drink since Saturday. The sobriety was proven for the last 3 days prior to the test, but that, oh, oopsie, I spelled it wrong. Okay, never mind. Wednesday. That testing was in a brain that had been swollen 4 days before. And the alcohol is water soluble. It's out of his body. It's out of his brain. But just like the concussion had a trickle effect of what it did to his brain, the swelling from his brain when consuming the alcohol stopped him from being able to recruit parts of his brain for its function. What is relevant to tonight's lecture is when I look at brain metabolism in somebody with Alzheimer's, this is what a normal patient's brain looks like. Again, they're in the scan, we're asking them to do this cognitive testing, and we can see how much brain power they're recruiting. I always love how much better adults do at recruiting their brain, just in general, than teenagers. But look at what happens with that Alzheimer's patient. They cannot get energy to go to the place in their brain to fuel it. And compare the Alzheimer's patient to the sober 15-year-old boy who drank 3 days ago. But because of that alcohol, his brain swelled, it was swollen, and it has not returned to normal despite there's no alcohol in his body. That brain metabolism, very powerful in what's happening. When you swell the brain from the head trauma, and when you swell the brain from the alcohol, that hippocampus stopped growing. So your ability to get the hippocampus the size of Michael Jordan's, well, it's blunted. Here's another problem. 26-year-old male, so his brain is supposed to be fully developed at this point, and there's some major defects, major holes in these. These are much larger defects in his brain, and the answer to his, what was the trauma, was it was marijuana. Unlike alcohol, where you cannot measure it in the patient, 48 hours after they consume it, marijuana was fat soluble. And that fat soluble molecule of THC is directly, it is very attracted to other fat heavy places in the body. So the sex organs and the brain have high levels of this once, after every hit. When you look at this 26-year-old male, it is 90 days after the last hit of marijuana and before you start to see the emptying of this molecule in his brain. So that molecule went to his brain, and every cell that it touched, marijuana very highly attracted to the hippocampus. It's going to land in that hippocampus. It's going to swell the hippocampus. And if you're already a mature adult, you've already got your brain fully developed, well, then it's going to stop the augmentation of the wiring of your hippocampus. It's not going to be able to repair any of that sections of the hippocampus. But if you're under the age of 26, you will never get the chance to fully grow your hippocampus. But now it's easy to say, oh yeah, okay, doc, I did not do I didn't have any head injuries. I didn't smoke marijuana when I was that age. You know, maybe I've had some alcohol, but not too much. My hippocampus must be fine. But here's where I lose a bunch of us saying, when you were under development, when you were being, you know, when your brain was growing, how much did you swell that hippocampus because of carbohydrates, because of adding processed food as the mainstay for your fuel over and over and over again? So here are 3 brains at the age of 60. Again, this is our healthy brain. And you know, just looking at the size of those holes, I don't want either one of those brains. We look at the first one, it has Alzheimer's. The second one, their BMI was elevated and their sleep apnea was elevated. Again, great predictors in that list of the study that we just showed you. You're going to have a harder time getting a hippocampal volume to the maximum status. But when we look at the development of healthy brains, how did they get there? This, you know, type 3 diabetes, otherwise known for Alzheimer's. And we look at that overweight patient, highly linked to a metabolism, to metabolic health that isn't working right. The second thing that happens is they stop sleeping well. And if you really want to damage a brain, hold your breath at night. That makes a little problem a massive problem. And again, you can see by the amount of defects in these brains that those are 60-year-old brains. You should not be having this big of problems at 60 years old. But to drive home the point, this is a 41-year-old brain. 41 years old. And what diagnosis do they have? This is a diabetic. Their blood sugars have been high for about 4 years in this. So not like, oh, I started with type 1 diabetes at the age of 11. No, in their mid-30s, their blood sugars got to the point where the diagnosis happened. And now the amount of defects in their brain because of the constant swelling that happens at a microscopic level, they don't even notice. When you ask somebody with a concussion, hey, could you tell that your brain wasn't working right? You know, like, yeah, you can be 7 years old and you can say something isn't right with the way my brain is working. They're not acting right. Or at least his buddy on the baseball team will say, hey, there's something wrong with him. You don't need a lot of training. You add a shot of tequila to somebody, and although you might not see the problem in the first 5 or 6 minutes, by about 15 to 25, and for sure by 30 minutes after consuming that alcohol, the swelling in those cells in the brain has happened that you can hear the change in their speech. You can see that they can't balance as well. The swelling was slower but easy to recognize. When you add carbohydrates, you can't hardly tell the difference. Even a trained professional, like they come in to see me, can I look at them and see, oh, is their brain swollen at the level of the hippocampus? I don't know. And it's such a subtle change, a tiny little sacrifice 1 week after the next week after the next week, that to look at them, to watch how their brain is working and ask me, do I think their brain hippocampal volume is decreased? You can't tell. The patient can't tell, and the doctor can't tell. You have to do the study just like what that study that I pointed out a couple minutes ago. When you measure the marker of what is the volume of their hippocampus, and can you measure if it's getting smaller? So when we look at the place in that hippocampus, here's a really old study, but I love it because it was one of the first times where we were able to see that this brain right here has, I'm going to put this in red. This is your hippocampus right here, this little fellow right there. And this is a normal sized hippocampus. Again, we're cutting it in half. So you take a bunch of these slices, you do the math to say what's the area, what's the volume of the hippocampus. And you look at the opposite, a hippocampus over here that's just barely this little sliver. And again, just this little sliver here. So much smaller volumes inside those MRIs. This was one of the first ways we were able to study that brain. And we found that the longer the patient was depressed, the smaller that hippocampus. So when patients come and say, Doc, am I going to have a hippocampus? Am I going to have dementia? The kinds of things, although those trail tests are interesting and we ask you to draw a clock, we have far better measurements to look at how well is your body doing at keeping that hippocampal volume a normal size. And it turns out that these 4 letters are really important, BDNF. Again, I was looking back at this content in the brains course that I teach and saying, okay, is it out of date? Do I need to do any changes to what this lecture is all about? And I am just fascinated at how the studies that have come out over the last 7 years have really fortified this as gospel, that you cannot increase the size of your hippocampus. Once you're past the maturation growth of 24, 25 years old, you have the length of your hippocampus is as long as it's ever going to get. The only impact you can have at this point is the volume of your hippocampus. So your sex, drugs, rock and roll. Okay, sex didn't count, but drugs or rock and roll, where the brain was swollen or the diet was so high that you did not get the full length of your hippocampus by the time you were 25. Now, however stubby or short your hippocampus is, the only way that you can increase its function is to make it thicker. So we say, well, what kind of things would make your hippocampus thicker? And we now know that BDNF is the neurohormone. This is a marker within the brain that acts kind of like Miracle-Gro. It will allow a regrowth. If we see a hippocampus, slunk back into a negative health sign, again, predicting dementia. Yes, those years of depression, those years of anxiety, they are a predictor for dementia, especially if it got severe enough that it changed the volume in your brain. Of this tiny little worm-like structure inside your brain that was super important when you were a teenager. How well you grew it, how long it grew, how thick it grew, had everything to do with a whole bunch of behaviors when you were a kid. And now that you're an adult, you say, all right, doc, you're telling me that if I look at all the markers that are out there for dementia, I look at that metabolic health, I look at my weight, I look at my hemoglobin A1C, I look at my genetics, and the biggest predictor that we have is what is the size of your hippocampus, and is it getting smaller or is it getting bigger? All right, so we're going to return back to this and show you. Actually, I'm going to use this one, I think, this time. Yeah, these 6 signs still mattered. The most important one is the hippocampus volume. And I just wanted to give you a chance to look carefully at some of the things that were written in the smaller print here, that it's not that these were shabby, it's that hippocampal volume outperformed them by a mile. So the real answer is, what do I do now? How do I get a hippocampus that's bigger and longer and fatter so I can prevent dementia? Because if you haven't seen what's coming down the pike, there is very little in the name of drugs that will prevent it. In fact, one of the predictors in that study was the higher number of prescription drugs you're on, the more likely you were to have dementia, meaning the more problems that we could see. All right, before I tell you how we're going to grow that, we're going to have a quick commercial break. I do have a few things that I want to say thank you to. Our pin chasers today, we had our Christmas party this morning and gave away some fun gifts, but we also did something that I like to talk about each December, and that is setting our goals, writing a letter to ourselves, and then a year, like I mailed these letters to the people who came about 3 weeks ago. And one of the folks on my team taught me about this. I had done something really similar probably about 10 years ago in a Bible study, but this is a great way to just say, write this letter to yourself, a self-addressed stamped envelope, and put down what you hope to be reading about yourself in 1 year. Kind of the act of praying about yourself, about putting your dreams and goals in writing, thinking about it so clearly that you put the period at the end of that goal. You really write it down. And so we wrote our letters today and we shared a few things. I want to show you a couple things that I'm super excited that I showed them. So I'm going to go to Dr. Boz favorites here. And the Dr. Boz favorites has, this is what I got my team for Christmas this year. All of my coaches got one of these. All of the folks on my team got one of these, and I gave 2 of them away at the Pin Chasers today because it is the coolest thing for making meat. If you're trying to live on this carnivore diet or high keto diet, and you're doing it without wasting a lot of food, but also really making great food, nothing has made me look better as a cook than this little turkey. So if you're looking for a good gift for yourself or anybody on your list, I can't tell you how thankful I am. I'm still living out of a hotel room thanks to that hurricane. And the first thing that's coming back into function once we leave the hotel room is I don't get to move back into a kitchen. I'm going to move into a bedroom, and it's probably going to be after the first of the year before a kitchen comes anywhere close to my life. The one thing we're going to be using is this. So I just wanted to say a lot of praise. I'm so happy about the 2 people that got the Dreo, and I can't wait to hear what they put into their Dreo to make some good food. The other thing I wanted to show off was I had a lot of you write in about what are the books that I read, or what are the books behind me. So they've put together the reading list of things that I read, and if you want to take a look at that, we thought folks might like to see that. So you can see those books that I'm reading about. There is also several other things on here, but I want to go to what I'm about to talk about in the next section. You're going to see why this is important in the show notes tonight, and in this link in an email that went out about a week ago. The insiders, the people watching the end of a show. This is an hour-long show. You get to the end of this, and this 21-day metabolic kick we do twice a year. It is a live class, meaning yes, you use Zoom, but it is live and in person. And we grow hippocampi. We grow hippocampi in here, and the popularity continues to go up. The price right now is $500 off, and the way you find that link is in the show notes in the link to this video. We will turn that link off after, I think it's another week and a half. I'll tell you next week if it's still open. Looking at the price being reduced for those of you that really want to reverse medical problems. There's a couple other things that I asked you to do last week, and one of them was to write reviews if you've bought any of our products on Amazon. I just want to say thank you to those that did that. It is a very incredible gift when you guys leave reviews on Amazon. Again, I've got a love-hate relationship with this store, and what matters is that real people have bought these products. Real people have said these reviews. They have to be a verified review, meaning they have to have sent it to you. And it's actually against the rules for me to do any way to incentivize, but just to blatantly ask for your help in reviewing a product on Amazon. It helps me so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, let's go back and finish what I think is the most important part about how do I grow my hippocampus. It's not an accident that this conversation happens every year in December for me, because one of the other things that I like to do with my family over the holidays is acts of service, right? I've got 3 kids. How do you keep them humble and show them what it's like to have some of the problems that I hope they don't see in their mom and their dad, and all their grandparents are dead. So we go to a nursing home, and we look at what a brain looks like when it's demented. Singing care. So I'm actually encouraging you to do that over this next month of December. If you're looking at what is a way that you can make your December a little better for your community, I pick up I was going to say the yellow pages. Pick up the search engine and look in your area for the assisted livings, and take a couple of friends and go sing Christmas carols or something where you spread a little joy into a nursing home, into an assisted living. It will change your motivation dramatically. I think it's why I am so passionate about bringing up a topic like brains and dementia over and over and over again, despite people clicking off and not wanting to hear about it. Like, oh, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. I'm like, it's your problem. It starts 15 years before you come to see me with a problem. And if you can see what it looks like, that point of no return. When I was researching for this show tonight, I found a nursing home an assisted living, in Arizona, where they feed them only a ketogenic diet, and how he has been able to free people who have come to his assisted living to return back to live with their families because their brain started working again. And I mean, that's such a rare event that's such a rare event. Once it stops working, the things I'm about to tell you about are not going to work very well. I mean, now this guy's the guy who runs this nursing home he would argue with me saying, no, I've seen it reverse. So I don't disagree with him. I bet that's true. But to get you to do the things before the memory problems show up, way easier than once you're in an assisted living, to get the kind of food into their brains and bodies to try and reverse these problems. Yeah, you're going to find a heck of a time doing that. Let me show you this. So we have a couple of things that I put on there. The 4 ways that I improve my my brain is, number 1, or anybody that's got issues. This morning I saw a few folks who were talking about brains and really reviewing what our goals are for the next year, writing those letters to ourselves in the upcoming year. And the ketones that circulate in your body matter. When patients show up and they have that list that used to be our ultimate list of how do I predict who's going to have dementia? Were they overweight? Did they have a high hemoglobin A1C? Did they have high uric acid? What was their blood pressure? How well have they been sleeping? Have they had sleep apnea? This list of metabolic problems that is highly related to their metabolic health, absolutely, that is the second thing that I would say. You got to be focusing on these things. You got to find a way to reverse these problems. I mean, that is what we're teaching in that 21 day. That's why it's not an accident that it's a hard class. It is a difficult class. It is exhausting on our team. And we only do it twice a year for a reason. But you can't learn it when you come see the doctor 4 times a year to refill your prescriptions. That's not how it works. You'll never have a big enough impact to undo those behaviors. So the first thing I tell patients when they're saying, if I'm at risk for dementia, what do I do right now? I'm like, you got to have ketones in circulation. I don't do goofy things like check my ketones every time on this show, every live show. What are my ketones? What's my glucose? I do that to say it matters that I press, and that's what it means to press ketones. I pulse them at least once a week. I mean, today I did a really good job, 2.6 on my ketones. It helps that I'm sleeping in a hotel room and there's no kitchen to snack from at night. But even outside of that, to watch and make sure my ketones circulate at a higher level at least once a week. And then I lead that class because it is one way that my mitochondria really gets improved. I mean, I've had students take it 4 times, and each time their hippocampus is thicker, it's better. In order to grow those cells in the brain to enhance that hippocampus, I will tell you, it has become part of the protocol for concussions to put them in a state of ketosis, to get them to drink ketones, to have MCT, and that is specific with C8 and C10 in their supplements, because we know when ketones are in circulation, there is fuel going into the cells that make the neurotransmitters that allow you to repair and enhance and grow that hippocampus. That BDNF is linked to the removal of inflammation and the supply of fuel to the mitochondria inside those brain cells. All right, so I know I'm belaboring that, but press the ketones, number 1. Number 2, you got to reverse these problems. You got to sleep through the night. Your BMI needs to be normal. Your hemoglobin A1C should be about 5. Your uric acid should be less than 5. And all of those things are what we work on as we teach people how to do this, not one day at a time. I mean, not one appointment 4 times a year, but that truly give us 3 weeks of your attention and you will not regret that. The third thing I do is I use sweat and coordination. So one of the things I used to do in the middle schools is I would take a jump rope and I would have a contest with who can jump the rope more times in 1 minute, your PE teacher or me. And sometimes I even did it in heels just to show off. No, I wasn't to show off, but I was in heels and said, doesn't matter. You're jumping an inch off the ground. And what that stimulus was doing is the right hand, the left hand have to be coordinated. And then you have to have the rhythm in order to jump over the rope. And breaking a sweat matters. Jump rope is this super hack for growing hippocampi. If you're looking for one activity that you're putting back on the list, you know, I have my personal goals for the year. But one of the warm-ups that I do whenever I start doing an activity is 1 minute of jump rope, 1 minute of jump rope. And it's goofy. It's not necessarily something anybody else cares about. But every time I do it, I imagine, okay, this is helping my hippocampus be a long, thick hippocampus as long as I live. All right, the last one, the final one before we take your questions is to do hard things. This is actually where the idea came from that we put on there. Is there the little puzzles that we did at the beginning? I've had people say, oh, I do these puzzles and they're good for my brain. It's hard for me. All right, I'm telling you, those puzzles did not grow anybody's hippocampus. They are a great way for me to get a slight assessment. Are you at risk for dementia? Are you at risk for, how quickly can you hold things in your brain? I mean, your hippocampus is in charge of mood and memory. That memory is specifically the short-term memory, and the mood is when I put stress on you. When you're stressed, can you regulate it? So both of those are really important predictor of dementia, and we can often see that when it doesn't work right. It's this hint that their brain isn't working right. Well, when people would say, I do the Sudoku, when I do those little puzzles in the New York Times, or I do the crosswords, that's what I'm doing to keep my brain. Okay, I'm telling you that's, okay, if you've never done a crossword, you might get a little bit of points for doing that to stimulate your brain. I'm talking about something difficult that causes you, well, you should not feel pleasure the first time you do it. Like if you don't know how to dance, take dance lessons. That's hard. You will not master it on the first time. You're going to have to keep going back. Your brain is going to have to recruit from the right side and the left side. And then there's rhythm and music. And then there's the anxiety of people watching you. Okay, all of that is difficult. That is pushing your brain to do something that it is not very good at. Or maybe you're good at it, but most people aren't. Another example is to learn a language, and don't learn it in private and never use it. You want to stumble in front of people. You want to screw it up. You want to have the moments of social, I don't want to say embarrassment, but social stress that you're not quite doing it right. That's stressful. That's hard on your brain, and healthy brains will recruit and rewire. It will stimulate that hippocampus to do things. So when I look at hard things, I tell people you should, sign up for the public speaking thing in your local community. There's a name for that and I'm forgetting it. It's a terrible episode to forget anything. I almost had it. Other things like, I do hard things. Like I know I have a lecture coming up at the end of January and I'm nervous about it. It's a topic that I've not done on stage before. I want to be good at it. I know that the stress of preparing for that, it's difficult for me. It's easy when it's a YouTube thing and I can push the camera and, Toastmasters. Thank you, everybody. Yes, that's what it was. Toastmasters is a place you go in your community and you can publicly speak. It's really important to push through that barrier and be part of something that's difficult. Other things that I do in my life is, I do try to exercise more. It's not something I talk about very much on this podcast. And when I do a good job of it, it feels great. But I'm sweating. I'm usually at a class where somebody's pushing me to do something. CrossFit's been one of my favorite things. I had 3 sons that they enjoyed the competition part of that, so I did it with them. I don't know that that's what I'm doing in the next season, but I'll push to do something that I'm not very good at and is maybe a little uncomfortable. All right, so first of all, I want to say thank you for sticking around, and I am looking at some of the questions in the chat. We're going to get to your questions in just a minute. Somebody said, what about cold plunges? Okay, cold plunges in the name of doing something difficult. The sweating that's in a sauna and then the cold plunge that comes after that, it is a metabolic stress, but the literature that links it to growing hippocampus, can't find it anywhere. It's a difficult thing. Staying present for 3 minutes in the cold water, it is a difficult thing. So you might get a little points for that. But for the most part, those difficult things are not as, they're not as short. they take longer to master them. Um, does wearing a funny hat help? Yes, it does help. I think it makes me smile. There was another one on here where I thought, all right, let's go over it. This is what happens if I start reading questions is I will get sucked down that rabbit hole. Let's go over to the questions that you've typed in. My nurse or my team, one of them is my nurse, who helps me to put these questions together and answer your questions live. This is how I don't get distracted. So Sam writes in and says, what makes the hippocampus grow as we are growing up? Yeah, I probably could have done a better job of explaining that. One of the reasons I used Michael Jordan for that teaching is because as you are growing up, first of all, pray to God your mom had a healthy pregnancy. That hippocampus grows so much in that last trimester of pregnancy and the first year of life. Nursing that baby, a comforting, nurturing, loving home for that baby that has a stable sleep schedule, a schedule that the baby can predict. I mean, the baby sleeps a lot anyway if they're healthy, but the growth of the hippocampus is happening so much in that first primitive or first few months of life. And then, boy, peripubertal. Once that puberty hits, it is growing like wildfire. And every time you get a concussion, every time they swell it with enough alcohol to give them a buzz, or marijuana to get them high, it stops the growth for up to 2 months. That hippocampal growth we can see it on the functional MRI, even the old ones, and it would not return to growing. It actually, it's up to 3 months. It's up to 3 months after it's been stunned, after that concussion happened. Up to 3 months it takes before that hippocampus is growing again and it's elongating and it's doing what it's supposed to. So you stop the growth. The question of how long is my hippocampus? Well, how many times did you get drunk between puberty and 25? So now you stop it for 3 months every time that happens. How many times did you get high on marijuana between puberty and 25? Okay, so that stopped it. And then how many head injuries did you have? Those are the 3 major ones for teenagers. Other things are depth and quality of sleep. The other reason I would use Michael Jordan is he really did have a stable childhood. Mom and dad were together. He had bedtime very religiously used in his family. He didn't have a stint with drugs. He had a major disappointment, which really probably reinforced grit. You don't need disappointment to be good to have a good hippocampus, but that commitment was really easy for you to see in the story of at least his brain growth. So hippocampuses come from stable homes, from good oxygen, from lack of injury or swelling. The next question that usually people ask is, well, what happens if I eat a bunch of sugar? Like, yeah, how well did you handle it? So the one of the questions I use when I'm trying to decide is it something I should pay attention to in a patient is I'll ask them about teenage acne. And if they had a couple of pimples, and no problem, but if they had this cystic acne, the acne that kind of gives you scars, it's such a reflection of inflammation that's where I start to say, oh, maybe they didn't hit their potential hippocampal growth during that peripubertal. And of course, going through all these other things like putting in ketones, cycling them every week, making sure you push ketones, working on that metabolic health, giving that coordination plus sweat. And then the last one was to do hard things. Those are the 4 ways that we know we have evidence. Okay, that's how you increase BDNF. That's how you increase that production of the hippocampus. Still a lot of research trying to say we need people to be in the study longer in order to get some pretty good results. But what do I do based on the knowledge that I have right now today to make sure my hippocampus is growing? And that's where those 4 things came from. All right, Betty writes in and says, are there really several words that are pronounced incorrectly years before a person gets dementia? If so, what are they? Incorrect enunciation is usually a motor memory issue, meaning they programmed, like take Joe Biden. He's got brain struggles, right? I think we can safely say that. No, that's not the one I wanted. He's got brain struggles. His childhood development where he had a stutter, as his brain sinks into his 80s, Could I guess that his hippocampus is smaller than it should be? Yes. Do I think the stress of the presidency is probably a lot of it? Sure. But what is one thing you can pick up on Joe Biden's speech is that it regresses to the motor memory from a very early childhood. So that stutter problem he had as a child, which he's, had overcome for many years, or really was able to mask it at a very, you had to really watch for it to see it. As he has some decline in the size of his hippocampus, I would guess. I've not seen his functional MRIs, but you'll see that revert to what was the pronunciation from childhood. So when I see patients mispronounce words, it's a regression of a brain injury or a brain wiring, not so much a new problem. I don't know if that's answering your words. Yeah, predicting dementia by watching what words they mispronounce. I don't know. I guess that's as good as I'm going to get for that question. All right, let's go to Chopper Muddleworks says, I have had a severe traumatic head injury and several concussions. Any suggestions to recover or prevent more decline? This happened at least over 20 years ago for me. It's such a great question, and I get this a lot. It's actually why the Department of Defense said, can you come teach this to like everybody at the National Guard? I mean, they had to collect points for like continuing education or something. And so they would come for this. But one of them was, if you've had a brain injury, even if it was decades ago, what are some of the things that you do? And that's where that brains course came from. If you are new to my channel, Chopper, go to the Dr. Boz and the courses and just click on the brains course and look at the outline. The outline shows you what are the steps that I use in patients when they've had old brain injuries and how do you repair them. What I would, in the cliff notes would be, for heaven's sakes, be in a state of ketosis. You got to have ketones around in order to heal that brain. If there was one lesson that really smacked me in the nose, was I was doing everything I could find literature for as a standalone clinic in the middle of the prairies, South Dakota, and I was doing a good job of healing brains. But it got so much faster when I first said, you got to be in ketosis before I'll do any of that. The presence of a ketogenic state in repairing a brain, even in a super old injury like that. I mean, one of the best testimonies, there's a wonderful coach and advocate on the page called, her name is Tammy Laubacher. And if you go to the coaches on the little clickies, you can find that too. And she had a terrific destruction of the insulation of the nerves on her body because of years of chemotherapy at a young age, like in her 30s. Breast cancer, she was supposed to die. She gets this awful chemotherapy and it just kind of strips the fat off of all of her nerves and she has terrible neuropathy. Now, praise God, she was alive. But she starts watching this and she goes into a state of ketosis and she did it steady for, oh God, she's such a great story. 3 years. And the neuropathy reversed. Now, had she asked me, is it even possible for you to reverse neuropathy? I would say, not if you're not in ketosis. And I would have been really cautious saying that she could do it because I'd never seen anybody with that severe of neuropathy. She was on like massive amounts of opiates to suppress the pain. And she reversed it. She got off the opiates. The neuropathy is gone. And just praise God that her brain and her nerves in her periphery, in her arms and legs, has restored to what is at least normal conduction of the nerves. I think we all continue to have brain problems that could be better, but for your traumatic brain injury, I can't tell you the number that have had persistent dizziness. I tell several stories about this in the brains course where they were 20 years ago, they fell off a scaffolding and it just, I don't know how they didn't die, but the brain injury was very severe and they just went back to their life, always struggling with their balance. It wasn't until they were persistently in a state of ketosis that I can't guarantee it goes away, but that's the only chance you have of reversing it. You got to be in ketosis. You got to be in ketosis. That's why that number one thing here is, yes, you've got the ketones, press the ketones. You can swallow them, but you can also take MCT, CHC10. Get the ketones in circulation. This is the part that's hard. is this metabolic, improve the metabolic health. This is where all the prescriptions come from. This is where the weight comes from. This is where the 21 day is. If you need a booster course, if you've taken the course and you say, how do I get to the next level? Man, I don't know of a way to teach it any better than we're doing. In fact, a friend of the show, Marty McCary, is now in charge of the FDA. I did that right. I'm making sure he's got that. That's his appointment. And I just keep thinking, when you've got somebody who's challenged the system, who's seen the flaws, and is in charge of how do we get innovative ideas to the front lines, I'm so hopeful that courses like this could be covered by insurance, or at least the commitment to say, you're never going to teach them in a 15-minute visit with the doctor every 4 months. And I contend that it is the physicians that have the access to the quality of information that it takes to reverse these problems. I'm trying to do my part. All right, let's go to integrity means all. Okay, can you detect all of this through the MRI? Oh, good question. So in that study, and again, we linked the study in the show notes. In that study, it is looking at the latest ability they call it a biomarker. How well can that biomarker assess the volume of your hippocampus? And we even as of like 5 years ago, the technology wasn't good enough that we could measure the volume of your hippocampus with this level of accuracy. And now we can say, oh my gosh, if you want to know if you have a problem, if you have dementia headed your way, an MRI where they measure the volume of your hippocampus is one of the biggest predictors. And you can say, do you want to spend the money? Or, I mean, I would spend the money if you were really worried about it, especially if you've got other risk factors. Like if you had one of the ApoE4 genes, I would get it measured in time. I would really commit to the persistent ketogenic process of repairing it, of growing it, of raising that BDNF. And then I'd look again in 4 years, 3 to 4 years, see if you can see an increase. Good question though. All right, identity R. What medications would do the same thing as alcohol? That's great. In the lifetime absence of alcohol, drugs, smoking, etc., someone who's never engaged in any of those. You know, this is part of my brains course too, is I teach them that booze in a pill is there. I give them the story about how it was created and how we used it. And if we want the booze in a pill to last for 5 days, we call it Librium. If you want the booze in a pill to last for 3 days, they call it Valium. If you want the booze in a pill to last for 2 days, they call it Klonopin or Ativan, and 1 day is Xanax. And I have some pictures in the brains course about what does it look like when these patients who never drank alcohol, I mean, many of them were from the state where I was trained, Utah, where they did not drink alcohol. It was against their religion, but they had more benzodiazepines than anybody in the country. That was at the time of my training, and their brains were riddled. To get them off of the booze in a pill and then get their brains trained to sleep well, which is how you repaired all those holes. I didn't use ketones then. I wish I would have. It would have been faster, but powerful teaching point that happened to them. So yeah, the biggest one I would say is benzodiazepines are going to be the hardest one. You know, I look at the ones that are sleep analogs like Lunesta, Sonata. They're like the type, not type 2 benzos, but they're the second generation benzodiazepines. They don't do anything nice to your brain either. They have some issues. But other drugs like Neurontin does a good job. That's an anti-seizure that doesn't seem to cause any of that swelling. Librium was actually not bad on the swelling department. It had other problems. So good question. The number one answer was be benzodiazepines. All right. The next one. Could the 15-year-old return to a normal by any chance? Yes. So that's why I went, oh, that's a great question. That's why I went, I'm going to pull that slide back up and show you. I was so excited when this teacher kept asking me back again and again and again to that middle school. So here's that slide again. that those two brains, they are it is such a striking difference of what was happening inside this brain. I mean, I wish I could, I do a much better job in the brains course where I say, look, this is why all of my kids were required to go click through these slides and be my helper to watch them when they were 12 years old. Because, if you just lecture at them, it doesn't work. But if they're casually listening about when other people would ask questions, it is this 15-year-old that, oh, the most beautiful part about a 15-year-old brain is how easy it is to fix it. How easy it is to fix it, especially if you can impact those decisions before they hit the age of 25, where that neurodevelopment really comes to a halt. Dang, you can do a great job. But when they wait and they are, looking at, can this one be fixed? I mean, that's the problem. The biggest reason that Alzheimer's disease shows up like that is it cannot get fuel into the cells that are starting into these blue areas. That's where the fuel is not getting in. Glucose is what it's used to, but if you can't get glucose because it's type 2 diabetes, it's got that resistance, you'll find great reprieve. You'll find the restoration of their brain when they put ketones in. Yeah. All right. 2 more quick questions. I see we're over time. What effect does CBD have on the brain? Well, CBD is also, it's fat soluble. The problem that I talk about with CBD is, okay, so when I do this Department of Defense training, the guy who was on stage right before me, he was the lecturer that came right before me, he would always give an update on what was happening in the world of marijuana, THC, and then CBD. And one of the things he would do is he was the undercover guy that would go buy CBD from these different places, bring it back to the government lab, and test to see, is it CBD or is it CBD plus TCH, which is the active ingredient, which is the one that swells your brain. And in all of the lectures that I sat through, and I went to him, I on purpose would go early to listen to him, everyone turned out positive. Like, I think it was 1 out of 80 that didn't have THC in it. Like, it says CBD on there, but if it gives you a dissociation, if it makes you feel high, guess what? That's the active ingredient. The reason you feel high is that it's not as pure as they're saying it is. And so when I talk about CBD, I always warn people, I wish we were talking about the same molecule. So I wouldn't put it in me. Let's put it that way. Last question, John Ford. Oh, I love John Ford. Does HIIT exercise like spin class help BDNF and hippocampal size? So the sweating and coordination, you're going to get that in the high intensity intermittent training. So the sweat and the coordination, those are the big markers for improving hippocampus and BDNF. So I would say yes, that does. All right, so before I hop off, I just want to say thank you. I know that it is the holiday season, and getting time for not only a show like this, it can be difficult, but I really would love to hear for those of you that are looking for an act of service in your holiday season, to plan out, to be a little goofy, do something difficult, go sing carols at a memory home, at an assisted living. It is an incredibly rewarding, although difficult, thing to do. All right, happy holidays. We'll see you next week.